Good to see you again. I hope you're starting to settle in with your microchurch. My kids started in a new school this year. Lincoln went into 8th grade, and he really had a hard time at first. Everybody already knew each other. They already had their social groups. Every morning, he didn't want to go to school because he felt so alone. He said he would just sit at his desk. Nobody would talk to him, and he felt the awkward of being alone every second of every day. We would celebrate when he had just a conversation with one person in that day. Now, things have gotten much better, but those first few weeks were brutal on him and on Mo and me as his parents. It sucks to be excluded, to be pushed to the outs, to be alone. And today, we're going to see Jesus on the move, unwilling to just stay in one place because there are people who are being left out of his kingdom. People who are being excluded by the very leaders who are supposed to represent God's heart. And Jesus needed to do something about it. Last week, we saw a crazy day in the life of Jesus, remember? All these people are looking for Jesus. And he tells his disciples in verse 38 that we must go on to other towns as well, and I will preach to them too. That is why I came. Now, don't skip over what these words reveal to us about the heart and mission of Jesus. Why did Jesus say he came? Reread verse 38. Mark then shows us a real-life example of why Jesus came. Jesus came for the exiled, the excluded, the poor, the outcast, and the leper, as it is in this case in verse 40 to 45. You'll get to read how Jesus heals this guy when you read your Bible with your microchurch here soon. But I wanted to share a take on the story that has stuck in my head and my heart for literally 20 years. It comes from Mac Lucado's book, Just Like Jesus. Lucado imagines what it must have been like for this leper. He writes this first-hand fictional account that I wanted to share with you today. One year, during harvest, my grip on the scythe seemed weak. The tips of my fingers numbed, first one finger, then another. Within a short time, I could grip the tool, but scarcely feel it. By the end of the season, I felt nothing at all. The hand grasping the handle might as well have belonged to someone else. The feeling was gone. I said nothing to my wife, but I know she suspected something. How could she not? I carried my hand against my body like a wounded bird. One afternoon, I plunged my hands into a basin of water, intending to wash my face. The water reddened. My finger was bleeding freely. I didn't even know I was wounded. How did I cut myself? On a knife? Did my hand slide across the sharp edge of metal? It must have, but I didn't feel anything. It's on your clothes too, my wife said softly. She was behind me. Before looking at her, I looked down at the crimson spots on my robes. For the longest time, I stood over the basin, staring at my hand. Somehow, I knew my life was never going to be the same. Shall I go with you to tell the priest? She asked. No, I sighed. I'll go alone. I turned and looked into her moist eyes. Standing next to her was our 3-year-old daughter. Squatting, I gazed into her face and stroked her cheek, saying nothing. What could I say? I stood and looked again at my wife. She touched my shoulder, and with my good hand, I touched hers. It would be our final touch. 5 years have passed, and no one has touched me since. The priest didn't touch me. He looked at my hand, now wrapped in a rag. He looked at my face, now shadowed in sorrow. I never faulted him for what he said. He was only doing what he was instructed. He covered his mouth and extended his hand, palm forward. You are unclean, he told me. With one pronouncement, I lost my family, my farm, my future, my friends. My wife met me at the city gates with a sack of clothing and bread and coins. She didn't speak. By now, friends had gathered. What I saw in their eyes was a precursor to what I've seen in every eye since. Fearful pity. As I stepped out, they stepped back. Their horror of my disease was greater than their concern for my heart, so they and everyone else I have seen since stepped back. Oh, how I repulsed those who saw me. 5 years of leprosy had left my hands gnarled. The tips of my fingers were missing, as were portions of my ear and my nose. At the sight of me, fathers grabbed their children, mothers covered their faces, children pointed and stared. The rags on my body couldn't hide my sores, nor could the wrap on my face hide the rage in my eyes. I didn't even try to hide it. How many nights did I shake my crippled fist at the silent sky? Why? What did I do to deserve this? But never a reply. Some people think I sinned. Some think my parents sinned. I don't know. All I know is that I grew so tired of it all. Sleeping in the colony, smelling the stench. I grew so tired of the bell that I was required to wear around my neck to warn people of my presence, as if I needed it. One glance and the announcements began, "Unclean, unclean, unclean." Several weeks ago, I dared walk the road to my village. I had no intent of entering. Heaven knows I only wanted to look upon my fields, gaze again upon my home, and see, perchance, the face of my wife. I did not see her, but I saw some children playing in a pasture. I hid behind a tree and watched them scamper and run. Their faces were so joyful and their laughter so contagious that for just a moment, I was no longer a leper. I was a farmer. I was a father. I was a man. Infused with their happiness, I stepped out from behind the tree, straightened my back, breathed deeply, and they saw me. Before I could retreat, they saw me, and they screamed and they scattered. One lingered, though, behind the others. One paused and looked in my direction. I don't know. I can't say for sure, but I really think she was my daughter. And I don't know. I can't really say for sure, but I think she was looking for her father. That look is what made me take the step I took today. Of course it was reckless. Of course it was risky, but what did I have to lose? He calls himself God's son. Either he will hear my complaint and kill me, or accept my demands and heal me. Those were my thoughts. I came to him as a defiant man, moved not by faith, but by a desperate anger. God had wrought this calamity on my body. He would either fix it or end it. But then I saw him. And when I saw him, I was changed. You must remember, I'm a farmer, not a poet, so I can't find the words to describe what I saw. All I can say is that the Judean mornings are sometimes so fresh and the sunrise is so glorious that to look at them is to forget the heat of the day before and the hurt of times past. When I looked at his face, I saw a Judean morning. Before he spoke, I knew he cared. Somehow I knew he hated this disease as much, no, more than I hated. My rage became trust, and my anger became hope. From behind a rock, I watched him descend a hill. Throngs of people followed him. I waited until he was only paces from me, and then I stepped out. "Master!" He stopped and looked in my direction, as did dozens of others. A flood of fear swept across the crowd. Arms flew in front of faces. Children ducked behind parents. "Unclean!" someone shouted. Again, I don't blame them. I was a huddled mass of death. But I scarcely heard them. I scarcely even saw them. Their panic I'd seen 1,000 times. His compassion, however, I'd never beheld. Everyone stepped back except him. He stepped towards me. Toward me. 5 years ago, my wife had stepped toward me. She was the last to do so. Now he did. I did not move. I just spoke. "Lord, you can heal me if you will." And had he healed me with a word, I would have been thrilled. Had he cured me with a prayer, I would have rejoiced. But he wasn't satisfied with speaking to me. He drew near me. He touched me. 5 years ago, my wife had touched me. No one had touched me since. Until today. I will. His words were as tender as his touch. Be healed. Energy flooded my body like water through a furrowed field. In an instant, in a moment, I felt warmth where there had been numbness. I felt strength where there had been atrophy. My back straightened, my head lifted. Where I had been eye level with his belt, I now stood eye level with his face. His smiling face. He cupped his hands on my cheeks and drew me so near I could feel the warmth of his breath and see the wetness in his eyes. Don't tell anyone about this, but go and show yourself to the priest and offer the gift that Moses commanded for people who are made well. This will show the people what I have done. And so that's where I'm going. I'll show myself to the priest and embrace him. I will show myself to my wife and I will embrace her. I will pick up my daughter and I will embrace her. And I will never forget the one who dared to touch me. He could have healed me with a word, but he wanted to do more than heal me. He wanted to honor me, to validate me, to christen me. Imagine that. Unworthy of the touch of a man, yet worthy of the touch of God. So much pain, hurt, brokenness, life, love, joy in these short 10 verses. Jesus couldn't stay in Capernaum because this man, this exile, this leper needed to have an encounter with him. This man needed the good news of Jesus to manifest in his life. I think at times we can all get comfortable and settled with the people who are already around us. Our Capernaum. We have our social groups, our friends, our acquaintances. We can almost get blinders on to the hurting people who we pass by. I couldn't stay the senior pastor of Real Life Church because I was compelled to go on to other towns as well and preach to them too. That is why Jesus made me. You too have a part in the mission of Jesus to show, live, and tell others about the good news of Jesus. So after reading Mark 1:35 through 45 with your microchurch, take 5 minutes to write down a few names of the people whom Jesus has sent you to share God's good news with. Also, write a blank line to represent the people of the other towns as well. This week, I need you to commit to praying for these people by name every day, including the yet unknown people God may bring across your path. Pray for them. Ask God for the opportunities to live, show, and tell them about this Jesus who has reached out and touched your life. Thank you for being here this week. Thank you for rising to the challenge. Thank you for loving God, loving people, and loving the people in this room sitting with you today. I love you guys. God bless you.